My boss thought he was untouchable when he humiliated me in front of everyone and shoved a severance envelope across the table. What he didn't know was that years earlier, I had risked everything to buy 90% of the company's stock. He believed he ended my career, but in reality, he handed me the perfect chance to end his. This is the story of how I took back the company and his crown. I still remember the exact moment my world seemed to collapse, though now, looking back, I realize it was the moment everything actually began. It was a Monday morning, the kind where the office lights felt too harsh and the coffee tasted like burnt water, and I was summoned into the conference room by my boss, Richard. He didn't even look at me when I walked in. He was leaning back in his chair, scrolling his phone, smirking like he was already bored of whatever scene he was about to cause. "Maria," he said finally, dragging my name out like it was a chore. "We need to talk about your future here." My stomach nodded. I had worked at this company for nearly a decade, built projects that brought in millions, sacrificed weekends, relationships, even my health for deadlines. I had poured everything I had into this place, believing loyalty would pay off. But the moment I sat across from him, I knew loyalty meant nothing. He snapped his phone shut, folded his hands, and launched into a speech about restructuring, cost-cutting, and underperformance. Each word was like a knife because I knew, and he knew, none of it was true. My team had just landed one of the biggest contracts in the company's history, a deal I had personally nurtured for months, and yet here he was, looking me in the eye and telling me my services were no longer needed. When I tried to push back, to remind him of my results, Richard leaned forward, his smirk curling into something uglier. "Maria, don't embarrass yourself," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've been riding coattails for years. You should be grateful we kept you around this long. But the truth is, you're replaceable. Everyone is." He slid an envelope across the table with the word severance typed neatly on the front, as if that made the betrayal cleaner. My fingers hovered over it, trembling, but I didn't open it. Around us, the glass walls of the conference room showed colleagues pretending not to watch, their eyes darting away when mine caught theirs. Humiliation burned through me hotter than fire. He wasn't just firing me, he was making an example out of me. And the worst part? He thought I had no power. I forced myself to ask why. Why now? Why me? Why after everything I delivered? His answer was a shrug. A shrug. As though nearly 10 years of sweat and sacrifice could be brushed aside like dust on his sleeve. "The board agrees," he added casually, as if that sealed the deal, as if invoking the board's name made his cruelty legitimate. Inside, I was screaming. He had no idea what he was saying. He had no idea that the board didn't belong to him, not anymore. I swallowed my fury and plastered on a thin smile. "If that's what you've decided," I said quietly, pushing the envelope back toward him. His brows knitted for a second, confused, but I stood up before he could respond. Every instinct screamed at me to break down, to shout, to demand justice, but I walked out with my head high, my heart pounding, my mind already racing ahead. Out in the hallway, whispers followed me like shadows. I could feel the weight of their pity, their fear. To them, I was just another casualty of Richard's arrogance, another woman discarded while he puffed up his chest and played king of the castle. They didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that 5 years earlier, when the company had been on the verge of collapse, I had stepped in quietly, investing my inheritance and buying stock when no one else believed it was worth a dime. They didn't know that the desperate founders had given me a deal so sweet it almost seemed insane at the time, majority control in exchange for saving their dream. They didn't know that the woman Richard had just humiliated owned 90% of the company he thought he controlled. But he would. Oh, he would. I spent the rest of the day packing my things slowly, deliberately, letting him think he had won. My coworkers avoided eye contact, but a few brave souls whispered that they were sorry, that I didn't deserve this. I just smiled and told them not to worry. Deep down, my fury was no longer hot, it was cold, precise, electric. Richard believed he had stripped me of everything. What he didn't realize was that he had just handed me the perfect stage. And when the curtain rose, I was going to show him, the board, and the entire company exactly who held the real power. The truth is, Richard had no idea who he was firing, because the woman he thought of as disposable was the same woman who had quietly kept this company alive when it was gasping for breath. Years before his smug speeches and glass-walled offices, when the company was drowning in debt and employees whispered about jumping ship, I was sitting at my grandfather's worn oak desk with a choice in front of me: walk away from the chaos like everyone else, or risk everything to save something I believed in. Back then, I wasn't a polished executive. I was just a mid-level manager with too much heart and not enough power. But I had one thing that mattered: an inheritance my parents had left me, sitting untouched in a bank account like a weight on my chest. Everyone told me to hold on to it, invest it safely, live cautiously. But when I looked at this company, the late nights, the brilliant minds, the projects that could change industries, I saw more than balance sheets. I saw potential. So when the founders, desperate and exhausted, approached me about a private stock offering to keep the doors open, I listened. They didn't expect me to say yes. They didn't expect me to sign the check that would not only save their legacy, but make me the majority shareholder. 90% of the company's stock, handed to me because no one else had the faith or the guts to take the risk. I remember the shock on their faces, the gratitude in their voices, and the trembling in my own hands as I realized I had just tied my future to this place. For years, I kept that truth buried. I didn't need recognition or applause. I didn't need Richard or anyone else to know. I sat through board meetings quietly, signed off on papers discreetly, let Richard puff out his chest and play king while I worked in the trenches, building relationships, landing clients, guiding projects. Power is sweeter when it's invisible. And for half a decade, that invisibility was my shield. But invisibility has its limits. As I sat at home the night after he fired me, the severance envelope still sealed in my bag, I pulled out the old, yellowing stock certificates and ran my fingers over the embossed company seal. 90%. My name printed in bold letters that Richard had clearly never bothered to read. My lips curled into a smile that surprised me with its sharpness. For years, I had let him believe he was untouchable. I had let him strut around the office, humiliating employees, taking credit for work he hadn't done, cutting down anyone who dared outshine him. But now he had handed me the perfect reason to stop hiding. I poured myself a glass of wine and spread out the paperwork across my dining room table: stock agreements, voting rights, board contracts. The language was clear. As majority shareholder, I could call an emergency meeting, demand full financial transparency, and even appoint or remove officers at will. My pulse quickened as I reread the clauses, each word a dagger waiting to strike. For years, I had told myself it wasn't the right time. That staying silent was safer. That letting him believe his illusion of control was easier than fighting. But as I thought about the look on his face when he slid that severance envelope toward me, as if I was just another pawn to sacrifice, I realized safety was no longer enough. I didn't just want my job back. I wanted to remind him, and everyone else, that queens don't bow to pawns. I spent the next few days carefully preparing. I called my lawyer, a woman who had helped me draft the original stock agreement, and when I told her what happened, she laughed so hard I thought the phone might crackle. "Maria, he's about to fall on his own sword," she said. We drafted notices, arranged for an official board meeting, and quietly began gathering financial records that would expose the mismanagement Richard had buried under glossy presentations. Each step tightened the noose, and I savored the thought of the look on his face when he realized the woman he had fired controlled every vote that mattered. Still, I told no one at the office. I wanted the reveal to be devastating, undeniable, theatrical. If he had humiliated me in front of glass walls and whispering coworkers, I would return the favor tenfold, this time in front of the board, the clients, and every employee who had ever flinched under his arrogance. But here's the part no one knows. It wasn't just about revenge. Yes, I wanted him to feel small, to choke on his smugness, to finally see himself through the eyes of the people he crushed. But deeper than that, I wanted the company, the people, the vision, the work, to be free of him. I had invested not just money but my soul into this place, and watching him twist it into a playground for his ego had become unbearable. Taking control wasn't just about payback. It was about restoration. And that, more than anything, fueled me as I signed the paperwork that would set everything in motion. As I stacked the documents neatly into a folder, ready for delivery, I caught my reflection in the dark window. Gone was the humiliated employee who had walked out of the office with whispers at her back. In her place was a woman with fire in her eyes and power in her hands. Richard thought he had ended my story. What he didn't know was that he had just written my opening act. The morning after I signed the notices, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, a cold, sharp sense of purpose that cut through every lingering doubt, and I knew the time for hiding was over. Richard thought he had written me off with a severance check and a smug shrug, but what he didn't realize was that I had been quietly stacking the pieces of his downfall like chess moves, waiting for the right moment to knock his king over. That moment had come. I started with the paperwork, official shareholder documents that gave me the right to call an emergency board meeting and demand full disclosure of the company's finances. With 90% of the stock in my hands, no one could refuse. My lawyer delivered the notices personally, her heels clicking down the marble hallway of the corporate offices while Richard was locked in his usual power lunches, oblivious to the storm building above his head. The board members received their letters with confusion, even alarm. Most of them had long forgotten who actually held the majority of shares, lulled into complacency by Richard's endless posturing. But confusion quickly turned into quiet phone calls, and within 24 hours my inbox buzzed with messages, cautious curiosity, veiled questions, hints of nervous respect. For the first time in years, they were looking at me not as an employee but as a force. While the legal wheels turned, I focused on preparing the evidence. I had known for years that Richard was reckless, arrogant enough to treat the company's money like his own personal wallet. I had files of expenses that didn't add up, invoices paid to consultants who were little more than his golf buddies, corporate cards maxed out on luxury hotels, dinners, and private jets. I knew the employees whispered about his affairs with junior staff, but whispers don't matter in a boardroom. Numbers do. And the numbers told a story of greed and abuse that no amount of smug smirking could disguise. For 3 sleepless nights, I combed through financial records, highlighting every fraudulent charge, printing every receipt, tabbing every page until the evidence filled 2 thick binders. Each page felt like another stone in the wall I was building around him, a wall he wouldn't be able to climb over when the truth closed in. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I wanted impact. If Richard had humiliated me in front of glass walls, I wanted his downfall to be public, undeniable, unforgettable. So I planned my reveal with precision. First, I reached out to the employees who had suffered under his arrogance the most, the ones he'd shouted at in meetings, the women he'd cornered with unwanted attention, the men whose ideas he'd stolen and claimed as his own. I didn't promise them revenge. I promised them freedom. Some were hesitant, fearful of losing their jobs, but when I showed them the documents proving I held 90% of the stock, their eyes widened. For the first time, they realized he wasn't untouchable. One by one, they agreed to stand by me. They didn't need to speak, just to show up at the meeting, to let their presence remind the board that the company wasn't just numbers, it was people. Then I prepared myself. I bought a new suit, tailored to perfection, not flashy but commanding. I rehearsed my speech in the mirror, cutting it down until every word was a blade, no filler, no wasted breath. I wasn't going to shout or gloat or let anger control me. No, I was going to be calm, collected, surgical. Because nothing terrifies a man like Richard more than a woman who doesn't flinch. On the morning of the board meeting, I walked into the building not as the employee who had been fired a week earlier, but as the majority shareholder returning to claim her throne. Heads turned as I strode through the lobby, my heels striking the polished floor like a drumbeat of inevitability. Whispers rose, eyes widened, and even the receptionist who had once avoided my gaze sat a little straighter, sensing something monumental in the air. Upstairs, in the boardroom, Richard was already seated at the head of the table, leaning back in his chair with that same infuriating smirk, surrounded by the board members he thought he controlled. When I entered, he actually laughed. "Maria? What are you doing here? You don't work here anymore." His arrogance was so absolute it was almost pathetic. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I laid the binders neatly on the table, slid a thick envelope of legal documents across to the chairman, and only then did I meet Richard's eyes. "This is an emergency shareholder meeting," I said, my voice steady, every syllable deliberate. And as majority shareholder, I am exercising my right to demand full financial disclosure." The room fell silent. Richard blinked, his smirk faltering just slightly, before he scoffed, "Majority shareholder? Don't be ridiculous." The board, but his words died when the chairman opened the envelope, scanned the documents, and looked up at me with a mix of shock and respect. "She owns 90% of the stock," he said quietly. Gasps rippled around the table. Richard's face drained of color. I sat down across from him, folded my hands, and smiled. For the first time in years, he was the one scrambling, the one on the defensive, the one realizing he had underestimated me so completely that he had built his empire on sand. And as I prepared to flip open the first binder and expose every dirty secret he had tried to bury, I thought to myself, this isn't revenge. This is justice. The air in the boardroom was so heavy you could slice it with a knife, and for once, Richard wasn't the one holding it. He tried to laugh, his smirk twitching at the edges, but the sound died in his throat when no one joined in. The binders in front of me seemed to glow with weight, every page a nail for the coffin I had prepared. "This is absurd," Richard barked finally, slamming his palm on the table as if volume could erase facts. "She doesn't own anything. She's a disgruntled ex-employee, that's all." But the chairman cleared his throat, his voice measured. "The documentation is legitimate. Maria owns 90% of this company. Every vote, every decision passes through her hands." The words dropped like thunder. Richard's face drained of color. I leaned forward, opening the first binder, sliding it across the polished wood so everyone could see. "This is a record of corporate credit card expenses," I said evenly. "Private jets to the Bahamas. Luxury hotels. Dinners that cost more than some of our employees make in a month. All signed off by Richard." Gasps rippled around the room. One board member adjusted his glasses, scanning the receipts with disbelief. This is theft." Richard's composure cracked. "It was business development," he snapped, but his voice was too high, too defensive. I turned another page, exposing invoices to consultants who didn't exist, payments to shell companies tied back to his golf buddies. Then came the kicker, a copy of a non-disclosure agreement paid for with company funds, tied to a harassment claim he had buried under hush money. Silence fell like a curtain. Even the employees who had quietly filed into the back of the room, curious about the meeting, stared wide-eyed, their mouths hanging open. I let the silence stretch, savoring it, before I spoke again. Richard didn't just fire me. He fired the person who saved this company years ago, the person who kept the lights on when no one else believed in it. And now he's been caught using it like his personal piggy bank. My words didn't tremble. They struck like steel. Richard's chair screeched against the floor as he shot to his feet. "Lies. She's twisting numbers. None of this matters. The board still answers to me." That's when I smiled, the kind of smile that had no warmth. "No, Richard. The board answers to me." I pulled out the final envelope, the legal order removing him as CEO, signed by me as majority shareholder. "Effective immediately, you're finished." His mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came. One of the board members leaned back, exhaling like a weight had been lifted, while another murmured, "It's about time." Employees in the back whispered, some even grinning. The king had been dethroned, and everyone knew it. Richard tried one last time, his voice cracking with desperation. "You'll regret this, Maria. You think you can run this company? You're nothing without me." I stood slowly, sliding the binders back into my bag, my heels clicking against the floor as I stepped toward him. "You fired me because you thought I was nothing," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "But the truth is, you were nothing without me all along. And now everyone sees it." His face flushed red, veins bulging, but there was nothing left for him to do. Security, summoned quietly by the chairman, appeared at the door. For the first time, Richard looked small, cornered, powerless. As they escorted him out, his protests echoing down the hallway, the employees in the back clapped. Not loud at first, just a ripple, but then stronger until the boardroom was filled with applause. It wasn't for me, it was for freedom, for the end of his tyranny, for the start of something new. When the room quieted, all eyes turned to me. "So what happens now?" one board member asked cautiously. I took a breath, steadying myself. "Now," I said, "we rebuild. For the employees who kept this company alive while Richard bled it dry. For the clients who believed in us. For the future this company deserves." And for the first time in years, I saw hope flicker across their faces. Hope that maybe the nightmare was finally over. I gathered my things, nodded once, and walked out of the boardroom with my head high. Richard had tried to write me out of the story, but I had taken back the pen. And the ending was mine to write. When I walked out of that boardroom after Richard had been escorted away, I thought the hardest part was over, but in truth, the real work was just beginning. Owning 90% of a company is one thing, proving you deserve to lead it is another. The whispers followed me down the hallway, employees glancing at me with cautious hope, others with disbelief, some even with fear. They had watched me for years as the quiet workhorse, the woman who stayed late, the one who absorbed Richard's arrogance without fighting back, and now suddenly I was the one in charge. I felt the weight of that responsibility settle on my shoulders like armor, heavy but protective. That night I sat in my apartment, binders spread across the table again, but this time it wasn't about proving Richard's corruption, it was about deciding the future. For so long I had invested in this company because I believed in its potential, and now I finally had the chance to make good on that belief. The next morning, I called an all-hands meeting. The auditorium buzzed with tension, employees crammed into seats, others standing along the walls. I walked onto the stage, heart pounding but voice steady. "Richard is gone," I began. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. "You've all seen what he did, how he treated you, how he treated this company. That ends today. I own this company, and starting now, we do things differently." I could see skepticism in some eyes, but also sparks of relief. I spoke about transparency, about rebuilding trust, about investing in people rather than Richard's vanity projects. No more private jets. No more golf trips on the company dime. The money we earn will go back into this company, and into you. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, not yet, but it was real, cautious, but growing. It was the sound of people daring to believe. In the weeks that followed, I worked harder than I ever had. I pored over budgets, slashed unnecessary spending, and redirected funds into employee development, fair wages, and projects that had been abandoned under Richard's reign. Slowly, the mood shifted. People walked taller, spoke louder, dared to pitch ideas without fear of being mocked or stolen. The office that once felt suffocating began to buzz with life again. Clients who had nearly walked away returned when they heard Richard was out. Deals that had stalled suddenly reignited. For the first time in years, the company wasn't bleeding, it was growing. But victory wasn't just measured in numbers. It came in smaller, quieter moments too. Like the day one of the junior designers I had mentored nervously knocked on my office door to thank me for giving her a raise she thought she'd never earn. Or the time an engineer stayed late just to tell me he finally felt proud to work here again. Or the afternoon when I walked past a break room filled with laughter, not forced, nervous laughter like before, but real, unguarded joy. Each moment stitched itself into me like proof that I was doing the right thing. Richard, meanwhile, didn't disappear overnight. He tried to fight back, emails to board members, threats of lawsuits, even a dramatic rant to a local business paper painting himself as the victim. But the evidence was too strong, the documents too airtight, and his reputation crumbled. Former allies distanced themselves, old scandals resurfaced, and soon his name was synonymous with arrogance and failure. The man who had once strutted through the halls like a king was reduced to whispers of pity and mockery. And me? I didn't need to gloat. Watching him fade into irrelevance was satisfaction enough. The real triumph, though, came months later, when we landed a contract bigger than anything in the company's history, a deal worth more than the last 3 years combined. The celebration that night wasn't about me, it was about us. We toasted in the break room with pizza and cheap champagne, employees hugging each other, some crying, some laughing until their stomachs hurt. As I stood in the corner watching, someone tapped a glass and shouted to Maria. The room erupted in cheers, louder than any applause I'd ever heard. I raised my glass, my throat tight, and for the first time I felt it, not just power, not just justice, but belonging. Later that night, when the building was quiet again, I walked through the office alone. The hum of the servers, the glow of the city outside the windows, the faint smell of coffee still in the air, it all felt different. This wasn't Richard's empire anymore. It was mine. Not because I had taken it by force, but because I had earned it, piece by piece, sacrifice by sacrifice, until the truth could no longer be ignored. I paused by the conference room where he had fired me, where he had smirked and shrugged and told me I was replaceable. I ran my hand over the cool glass wall, smiling to myself. Replaceable. That word used to haunt me. Now it made me laugh. Richard was gone. I was still here. And I wasn't going anywhere. As I locked my office door and headed into the night, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the inheritance I had risked, the humiliation I had endured, the nights I almost gave up. It all led to this, standing on my own 2 feet, not as someone's pawn, not as someone's victim, but as the woman who had taken the crown without asking permission. And in that moment, I knew the truth. Richard had been right about one thing. Everyone is replaceable. Everyone but me.